She just wanted a peaceful flight. An elderly black woman, tired but smiling, settled into her seat. But then it happened. A flight attendant's hand struck her face, sharp and unapologetic. Gasps filled the cabin, and passengers froze in shock. She clutched her cheek, eyes welling with disbelief. The woman wasn't just humiliated. She was targeted. But what the flight attendant didn't know, the man waiting for her at the arrival gate held more power than she could ever imagine. And when he found out what happened, everything changed. Would justice be served, or would power and privilege win again? Stay tuned. Miss Eleanor Johnson had spent a lifetime believing in kindness. At 72, she had seen the world change. Some things for the better, some not at all. She was flying to see her granddaughter, a trip she had looked forward to for weeks. Dressed in her Sunday best, she moved carefully down the aisle, gripping her purse. The flight was crowded, the energy restless. As she reached her seat, she smiled at the attendant, a young woman with a sharp uniform and an even sharper glare. Eleanor didn't think much of it. She had faced worse. But as she settled in, she had no idea that this routine flight would become a humiliating lesson in how far respect still had to go. And the worst part? The person responsible had no idea who she had just disrespected. Eleanor adjusted her seatbelt, her fingers trembling slightly from age, not fear. She had flown countless times before, but something felt different. Maybe it was the way the flight attendant hovered nearby, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes scanning Eleanor as if she didn't belong. "Ma'am, you need to hurry up," the woman snapped, arms crossed. Eleanor nodded politely, fumbling to place her small carry-on under the seat. The attendant huffed. "We don't have all day." A few passengers glanced over, sensing the sharpness in her tone. Eleanor felt it too, an unspoken disdain laced beneath the words. She had spent her life reading between the lines. Moments later, as the flight prepared for takeoff, Eleanor reached for the call button. She had always been careful with her health, and her arthritis made it difficult to open the tiny water bottle provided. It was a simple request for help, nothing more. The attendant approached, eyes cold. "What do you need now?" Eleanor hesitated. "I'm sorry, dear. I just need some help opening this." The woman sighed dramatically. "You people always need something. You people." The words stung sharper than they should have. Eleanor blinked, trying to keep her composure. But before she could respond, the attendant grabbed the bottle, twisted the cap off with unnecessary force, and shoved it back into Eleanor's hands. The plastic crinkled under the pressure. Then it happened. As turbulence jolted the plane slightly, the water bottle slipped from Eleanor's grasp, spilling a few drops onto the tray table. The attendant's eyes flared. "I just helped you, and now you're making a mess," she snapped. "Maybe you shouldn't be flying if you can't even hold a bottle." Passengers turned. Whispers spread. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "It was an accident," she said softly. The attendant scoffed. "Of course it was." And then with a sudden, shocking motion, she raised her hand and swatted Eleanor's shoulder. Hard. Not enough to hurt, but enough to humiliate. Gasps filled the cabin. A young woman across the aisle dropped her phone in disbelief. An older man shook his head. Eleanor's breath caught. The sting on her skin was nothing compared to shame flooding her chest. She had lived through the days of sitting in the back of buses, separate water fountains, and being told to wait her turn. But this was happening now? Tears welled in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. The flight attendant smirked, straightening her uniform, oblivious to the growing tension in the air. But she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, because the man waiting for Eleanor at the arrival gate wasn't just her husband. He was the owner of the entire airline. The plane landed with a jolt. But the turbulence in Eleanor's heart hadn't settled. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Around her, whispers buzzed like static, passengers shaken by the flight attendant's blatant disrespect. Some looked at Eleanor with sympathy, others with discomfort, as if unsure how to react. The flight attendant, however, showed no such uncertainty. She stood tall at the front of the cabin, checking her watch, eager to disembark and leave the incident behind. To her, it was nothing, just another older woman she could dismiss, another moment of casual cruelty that would go unnoticed. But this time, it wouldn't. As passengers filed out, Eleanor moved slowly, gripping her purse with steady hands. When she stepped into the bustling terminal, she spotted him instantly. Richard Johnson, her husband, the man who had built the airline from the ground up. A black man who had fought his entire life to prove that dignity and success belonged to him as much as anyone else. The moment his eyes met hers, his smile faltered. He knew something was wrong. He had spent decades reading every emotion behind Eleanor's eyes, and right now, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: humiliation. Before she could speak, the flight attendant brushed past Eleanor, shoving her aside as she rushed toward the exit. She barely noticed the well-dressed man standing nearby, until his voice stopped her cold. "Excuse me," Richard said, his tone calm but firm. "Are you the attendant from Flight 1627? She turned, ready to give a rehearsed professional response, until she saw his face. A flicker of confusion crossed her features, then unease. "Yes," she said hesitantly. Richard folded his arms. "Good, because we need to talk." Her stomach dropped. Something about his voice and presence told her this wasn't just a concerned passenger. And when the realization finally dawned, her breath caught in her throat. She had just humiliated the wife of the man who owned the airline. The flight attendant's face turned pale as the weight of her mistake settled in. Richard's gaze was steady, unwavering. His voice had no need for anger. The truth alone was enough. Airport security was called, and within minutes the airline's regional manager arrived, horrified as Richard explained what had happened. Passengers who had witnessed the incident stepped forward, recounting how the flight attendant had dismissed and humiliated Eleanor. And then, in front of the entire team, Richard made his decision. She will never work for this airline again. His words weren't loud, but they carried power. The flight attendant's breath hitched, realization setting in. One moment of prejudice had cost her everything. But for Eleanor, this was never about revenge. Standing beside her husband, she felt a deep sadness settle in. How many times had such moments happened to others, unseen and unheard of? How many people had been silenced, their dignity stripped away without consequence? This wasn't just her story. It was the story of countless others who had endured casual racism in silence. As Richard guided her toward the exit, Eleanor turned back, looking at the stunned flight crew and passengers still standing there. "Maybe next time," she said softly, "you'll think twice before treating someone as if they don't belong." The world may not change overnight, but every story like this, every moment that exposed the truth, was a step towards something better. The question is, how many more stories must be told before people finally listen? If you enjoyed this story and found it thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in this situation? Your support helps bring more eye-opening stories to life. Where are you watching this video from? Let us know in the comments. Take care.